this point, people have been studying the impacts that humans have had on the world for a solid 50 years. While it's pretty hard to get a handle on exactly how the choices we make every day affect the environment, there's really no question that our lifestyles, our cars, our need for more farmland, and our love for all kinds of plastic crap are putting the hurt on ecosystems all over the world. Human activity all by itself, just people doing what they do, could be responsible for the extinction of nearly 1,000 plant and animal species today, most of them over the last century. And if you don't really care about the Barbary lion or the St. Helena olive or the passenger pigeon or anything else we've driven into extinction, the one thing is, we need a bunch of other organisms. The ecosystems of the world are working very hard for us every single day, purifying water, sucking carbon dioxide out of the air, producing all the food we eat, all very important ecosystem services, benefits that the natural world gives us for free. So having ecosystems and keeping them intact is important not only for the organisms who live in them, but also for us, humans, the animals who rely on them for thousands and thousands of things that we can never do ourselves. This is a big deal. We've got to look at how our actions are affecting ecosystems that we need for our survival. Basically, we're screwing up the environment 6 ways from Sunday. But to make it easier on ourselves, let's start with the top 5. We often hear about how all the different ways that our behavior is affecting the biosphere. You've got extinctions, climate change, desertification, acid rain, all types of air pollution. But you're asking, why is this bad? And why is this going on? How is this stuff destroying the earth? Well, I do kind of understand. These services that ecosystems provide and do for us, all the dirty work they do, can be broken up into 4 different categories. They're things that we could never, ever duplicate or work around, no matter what kind of smart technology we come up with. First, healthy ecosystems provide support systems that create and replenish the basic foundation of the Earth's biological systems. These services include recycling all the compounds that are necessary for life through the carbon, water, nitrogen, and phosphorus cycles. They include other processes that we've looked into, kind of like forming new soil and producing atmospheric oxygen. Some ecosystems contribute more to these services than others, but none of them can get these basic jobs done unless they're intact. Now, 2, ecosystems also provide provisioning services, giving us the raw materials we need to live. Like the ocean provides food in the form of fish and all kinds of other stuff. And rivers and aquifers and other freshwater sources give us water. Plants and animals also yield all kinds of fiber that we use for clothing and shelter. And around us, we find all different types of fuel, whether it's in the form of biomass, like grasses or wood, hydropower in the form of flowing water, or carbon that's locked in million-year-old trees that we're now re-releasing into the atmosphere. Now, ecosystems also perform super important regulating services, moderating how many of the Earth's services can get dangerous if they get out of whack. Fungi and other organisms take on the task of decomposing a bunch of dead stuff and make poop break down. Meanwhile, plants help filter the water you drink and the air you breathe and provide a lot of good flood control. They also absorb all the carbon that we exhale and that our car emits, which in turn helps regulate the climate. And finally, 4, ecosystems are just really kind of awesome. It's nice to be surrounded by happy plants and critters doing their business. Nice, really robust ecosystems give us places to play, scenes to inspire us, and things to just discover and learn about. These things are less tangible, but they're still important cultural services for us. An interesting thing about ecosystem services is that economists actually can and do calculate the monetary value they provide for humanity. If, for example, we had to do all of the things that ecosystems do for us, it would cost us $46 trillion a year, which is a hell of a lot of money, considering that the output of the global economy is $66 trillion a year. So yeah, we should be pretty happy we don't have to pay for all that. But you'll notice it keeps saying that ecosystems can only serve up all of this awesome stuff if they're intact. By that I mean they specifically have to have their biodiversity intact, because ecosystems are really just a bunch of living and non-living things that work together. And unless their living parts are healthy, they're basically just rocks and weather. The main part and the main reason biodiversity is important is that it makes ecosystems more resilient to the never-ending change. Ecosystems with high biodiversity are way more resilient to disturbances than those with low biodiversity. In a high biodiversity system, if you take one species out of the mix, it's less likely that the ecosystem itself will collapse. If you take a small amount of Amazon rainforest, in that small patch of land, there are more different species of plants and animals than there are in all of Europe. So If a species of insect goes extinct, there's less of a risk that the whole house of cards will fall than, say, in the Sonoran Desert, where there are very few organisms. So the disappearance of one species there could affect the entire ecosystem. So the best way to understand our impacts on the environment is through how we affect biodiversity. Unfortunately, it turns out we've been doing a really terrible job of endangering some of the highest biodiversity ecosystems on the planet. In some cases, we're having impacts on the organisms through themselves directly. In other cases, we're affecting biodiversity indirectly by creating one or two changes in that ecosystem that cascade and cause all kinds of problems for living things. Now, if you go back to that little bit of Amazon rainforest, because it's even one of those super resilient ecosystems, we're having huge impacts on it. How? Well, first, we're removing a lot of what makes a forest a forest. We're taking all the trees out. According to some estimates, we're clear-cutting around 8,000 hectares of trees every single day just to provide land to graze cattle on, to harvest wood on, to make coffee tables or whatever. When you cut down a hectare of rainforest, suddenly a place where a few thousand species used to live turns into a place where just a handful of species can live. Some grass, maybe some weeds, maybe some rats or mice, some impacts, some insects, and cows, because we love to eat cows. Now, when you take out so many of the living things on that hectare of land, a bunch of things happen. For starters, you're not just affecting the ecosystem, but the neighboring ecosystems as well. For instance, all those trees that were cut down, giving the service of regulating the flow of rain that the rainforests get, not only by absorbing some of it, but also by slowing down runoff, letting the water seep into the soil before it slowly makes its way into the streams and rivers and ultimately the ocean. But when those trees are gone, the water hits the land and shoots off to the nearest stream. It causes erosion, and it washes minerals and chemicals all the way down to the sea, where it affects marine ecosystems. And when I say affect, I don't mean in a good way. This is really what's called a cascade effect, in this case caused by deforestation, one of the most obvious observable human impacts. In addition to causing more flooding and changes in water quality, deforestation on a really big scale can lead to another impact: desertification, or the spread of dry, unproductive landscapes. By cutting down trees, it doesn't automatically turn a forest into a desert. Desertification itself is driven by a bunch of additional factors, like overgrazing from cattle and over-irrigation. So how can overwatering something make it turn into a desert? Well, when we use groundwater to irrigate crops, natural salts in the groundwater build up in the soil, eventually making it so salty that nothing wants to live there. Over time, fertile land near desert ecosystems becomes overtaxed, and the desert spreads. And this is exactly what happened in China over the past century, where overgrazing and the city's unquenchable thirst for water has caused the Gobi Desert itself to grow by 3,600 square kilometers every single year. Now, these two impacts by themselves clearly limit the biodiversity of otherwise great ecosystems, but because they also result in fewer trees that provide the all-important services of releasing oxygen and absorbing carbon dioxide, the next domino is going to fall, and that's climate. Carbon dioxide, well, that's a greenhouse gas. It insulates the earth, so it stands to reason that the more carbon dioxide there is in the atmosphere, the warmer the earth is going to be. And the thing is, we're reducing the size of forests all the time. We're also unleashing all kinds of greenhouse gases by burning fossil fuels. Now, this is a double whammy that's driving global warming. As a result, we're seeing decreases in the level of polar sea ice. That means less habitat for polar bears, for seals, and seabirds. More temperate animals are moving closer to the poles, and hotter, drier conditions are causing more grass fires and forest fires. While the climate itself has changed many times in the past, these changes usually took place over centuries, or even millennia, thousands of years, giving organisms the time and the chance to adapt or move. These changes today are taking place within our lifetimes, and it's really kind of a big deal, and it's pretty complicated. So, hopefully, you can see now how human impact can lead to another, and even indirectly, it can end up reduced biodiversity altogether. But it's hard to overlook the really more important and immediate impacts that we can have on ecosystems. One of the more in-your-face ways of species have a knack for causing a ton of problems. They outright eat native vegetation. They kill species to the point where it rocks the world and destroys entire ecosystems. Now, finally, perhaps the most direct impact we have on biodiversity is simply over-harvesting certain organisms. We're overfishing the oceans to meet growing demand for popular fish species like tuna. While we're on land, we're exterminating important predators like wolves to protect livestock, to keep our cows safe. Unless diverse these ecosystems are, the more vulnerable they become to disturbances. So, the fact is, there's a bunch more where that came from, because there's a whole separate area of study and effects that humanity has had on the biosphere. All of that comes from us simply putting the wrong amounts of certain stuff in the wrong place at the wrong time. That's what we call pollution. So, keep an eye out. Take care of yourself.